Hey everybody, Dr. Phil here. This is going to be a video on national differences in political, economic, and legal systems in the wider context of international business. So let's start by talking about political systems. So there's really kind of two ways we can classify this: collectivism versus, or I guess you could say, and individualism. So collectivism is a system that stresses the primacy of collective goals over individual goals. Kind of trace this roughly back to the Greek philosopher Plato. Society should be stratified into classes. So if you're not familiar with the word stratified, just basically breaking it into different groups. And then property should be owned in common. Now, when collectivism is emphasized, the needs of society are generally viewed as being more important than individual freedoms. Socialism. So let's talk about socialism very briefly. So socialists, those who believe in public ownership of the means of production for the common good of society. We can kind of trace those roots back to Karl Marx, again, very roughly. Advocates state ownership of basic means of production, distribution, and of course exchange. The state then manages enterprises in order to benefit society as a whole. Excuse me. Now, in the early 20th century, socialism was kind of split into communists and what we call social democrats. So, communists believed socialism could only be achieved through violent revolution and totalitarian dictatorship. This was in retreat worldwide by the mid 90s. Social democrats work to achieve the same goals, but by basically non-violent, more democratic means. Many state-owned enterprises failed to succeed, and many nations implemented privatization programs. This is where the sale of state-owned enterprises to private investors. So let's talk about individualism. So individualism suggests that individuals should have freedom over economic and political pursuits. This can be roughly traced to Aristotle, who argued that individual diversity and private ownership are indeed desirable. This was, of course, refined in the works of David Hume, Adam Smith, and John Stuart Mill. Individualism stresses individual freedom and self-expression, letting people pursue self-interest to achieve the best overall good for society, and then, of course, democratic systems and free markets. So the idea here is more, if you let people pursue what they want, it would still actually benefit society as a whole. So democracy is a political system in which government is by the people, exercised either directly or through, in many cases, through elected representatives. The most common form today is representative democracy. This is the elected representatives vote on behalf of constituents. Freedom of expression, opinion, and organization, free media, regular elections, universal adult suffrage, which means the right to vote, limited terms for elected officials, fair court system, non-political state bureaucracy, non-political police force and armed services, and of course free access to state information. Now, totalitarianism is a form of government in which one person or political party exercises absolute control over all spheres of human life, and opposing political parties are prohibited. In most totalitarian regimes, there's widespread political repression. There's generally no free and fair elections. The media is almost always censored. Basic civil liberties are denied, and the challenges to regime are prohibited. So there's four major forms of totalitarianism today. The first is communist totalitarianism. This advocates achieving socialism through totalitarian dictatorship. We have theocratic totalitarianism. This is political power is monopolized by a party, group, or individual that governs according to religious principles. Tribal totalitarian, number three, is where a political party that represents the interests of a particular tribe tends to monopolize power. And then finally, right-wing totalitarianism. This deals with individual economic freedom is allowed, but individual political freedom is restricted because it could lead to communism. And then we have what we call pseudo-democracies. So many nations lie between pure democracy and ironclad totalitarianism. Authoritarian elements capture much of the machinery of state and use this to deny basic political and civil liberties. Examples would be Russia under Vladimir Putin and Hungary under Orban. Now, political ideology and economic systems are actually connected. Three types of economic systems are market economy, command economy, and of course mixed economy. The market-based economic system, likely in countries where individual goals are given primacy over collective goals, which makes sense. And then state-owned enterprises and restricted markets are common in countries where collective goals are dominant. In a market economy, goods and services a country produces and the quantity in which they are produced is determined by supply and demand. So think more of the Western economies, the US, the UK. Supply must not be restricted by monopolies. The government encourages free and fair competition between private producers, and there's a constant incentive to improve products and services. In a command economy, the government plans the goods and services a country produces, the quantity in which they're produced, and the price at which they are sold. All businesses are state-owned and have little incentive to control costs and be efficient. Then because there's no private ownership, there's little incentive to better serve consumer needs. We also see that dynamism and innovation are generally going to be absent. In a mixed economy, this includes some elements of market economies and some elements of command economies. The governments take over troubled firms considered vital to national interests, sometimes promoting the development of public and private sectors it believes to be important for the future economic development of the nation. Mixed economies are generally becoming less common. The legal system is defined as laws that regulate behavior, along with processes by which laws are enforced and through which redress for grievances is obtained. A country's legal system is important because laws regulate business practice, they define the manner in which business transactions are executed, and they set down rights and obligations of those involved in business transactions. Well, of course, we have different legal systems. The predominant one in the western part of the world is common law, based on tradition, precedent, and custom. This is found in most of Great Britain's former colonies, including the US, and of course, Great Britain itself. Civil law, which is based on a detailed set of laws organized into codes. This is found in more than 80 countries, including Germany, France, Japan, and Russia. And then theocratic law, which is more based on religious teachings. So, for example, Islamic law. There are differences in contract law. Common law and civil law systems approach contract law, a body of law that governs contract enforcement, differently. The contract specifies conditions under which an exchange is to occur and details rights and obligations of the parties. In a common law state, contracts are very detailed with all contingencies spelled out, whereas in a civil law state, contracts tend to be shorter and much less specific. So property rights are legal rights over the use to which a resource is put and over the use made of any income derived from that resource. Private action deals with theft, piracy, blackmail, and the like by private individuals or groups, and can include organized crime. With respect to public action, public officials may extort income or resources from property holders. For example, excessive taxation, requiring expensive licenses or permits from property holders, or taking assets into state ownership without compensating the owners. And then finally, I wanted to talk briefly about the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. This makes it illegal to bribe a foreign government official in order to obtain or maintain business over which the foreign official has authority. All publicly traded companies must keep detailed records, so it's clear whether a violation has occurred. Facilitating or expediting payments to secure performance of routine government actions are permitted. So payments aren't necessarily illegal. It just really depends on, what was the purpose behind those payments and what was the motive behind those payments. And then intellectual property. So this is property that's the product of intellectual property. Patents give inventor the exclusive rights to the manufacture, use, or sale of that invention. Copyrights are exclusive legal rights of authors, composers, playwrights, artists, and publishers to publish and dispose of their work as they see fit. And then finally, trademarks, and you've probably heard of all three of these. Trademarks are designs and names, often officially registered, by which merchants or manufacturers designate and differentiate their products. Okay, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you all in a future video. Take care.